live, man. How have you been? It's been a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's been hectic for me, but I'm pulling through. I'm doing the best I can.
How's the meditations been coming? Have I know you've been moving, so don't worry. I'm not going to hold anything against you. I've just wanted to get an update and see where you've been and how the practice has been coming along.
Yeah, well, I've been, I not really doing every day like I wanted to, but oddly enough, since like house sitting, the most opportune times to practice and just get a session in are actually like during my work day. Like I drive around a lot, so sometimes, if I'm like waiting on someone for their appointment and I just have a spare half hour or 20 minutes or so, like I'll just, park somewhere with some shade and I'll bring my headphones around. And it's oddly enough, like, I don't know if maybe it's the difference of doing it in the morning as opposed to like in the middle of the day, but I feel like it resonates a lot better in the middle of the day, funny enough. Just kind of like catching up, and it's easy to let things kind of go by the wayside and sort of lose your focus and, forget how to breathe sometimes, or forget, what it feels like to breathe. And it's kind of nice in the afternoons because I do feel like I'm like catching myself, and like I can like,
Yeah.
if it can go one of two ways. It's either I'm having kind of a bad day and it helps me like redirect, or maybe I'm having a good day and then I fit in a meditation and then it makes sure that, things still go, as smoothly, or, if ever, there's something that's thrown out of nowhere for me, which there's been a lot of that
Yeah.
during the move.
Yeah.
It really helps. It's really helping grounding. And, even despite the, I guess my personal, issues with the compassion bit of it, at least in practice, outside of the meditations, like overall, it's been really helpful just to kind of ground myself and remind myself to take some deep breaths in.
Got it. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Sorry, I thought you were gonna say. So I thought you were saying and, but you ended on the word in, and so I was like waiting for more. No problem. Yeah, no, I think that's great, man. Yeah, there's a lot to say to that. I mean, I have a response, and I also have a question for you. But I
Okay.
first was gonna say that's great. I find that in the middle of the day as well is actually really nice for me too. You find your cadence, and you kind of get that rhythm going. And you're right. Some people love it early in the morning. Some people like it before bed. And I think middle of the day is like one that's not often talked about. But you're totally right. It's kind of
Yeah.
like a redirect of a mindset. Whether your
For
mornings.
me, it's like the convenience factor, but really,
Oh,
I was thinking about it like, just the other day, and it is sort of, like what we last talked about, of like I'm trying to make this practice look like something, and it's almost sort of a way of me to like push against that, which is like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, I have to meditate like when the sun rises, or like
yeah,
something like, holistic like that. But like really, it's like sometimes I'm running late, sometimes I don't. My day kind of just throws some curveballs at me, but that's kind of the beauty of having some time in the middle of it and being like, oh, why don't I just take advantage of this? And so,
yeah, absolutely.
it is like a practice of just letting the uncontrollables be uncontrolled, right? So,
Yeah, that was. I mean, that was going to be what I was going to say to that. Is yeah, I think often people will want to be so stringent, and it's not that you shouldn't be disciplined or stringent, but you also should be dynamic, right?
yeah,
If you're somebody who, in your situation where you're just going to have naturally more time throughout the day, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, whatever it is, then yeah,
yeah,
take advantage of that. If it's something that you want to work up to where you're like, no, I really want to try it in the mornings, then give it a shot, like, but if it turns out to be
yeah,
something that is beneficial, great. If it turns out to be more of a nuisance and you find yourself not even meditating at all, well, then obviously, the former is going to be a better option for you. And there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
And there's no set in stone way to do this, right? It's what works with you. So I think that's important. And I'm happy you found it. And,
yeah.
yeah, just keep,
Regardless, I'm meditating more than I have been like in the last like year or so, or 6 months previous.
that's good.
So, it is kind of nice to have that idea, and it's nice to have that reminder and that type of like, if you missed a day, don't worry about it.
Hmm.
We're not judgmental here, and it's really good because like this is, I don't want to say like selfishly like this is something I need or this is something that I want to do, but it is like it is a form of self-care. It's something that like a lot of things I tend to neglect on. So it is nice to kind of fit this in when I do have the chance.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's kind of like the important thing is, I mean, there's definitely, you definitely want to have some discipline there, right? Like this isn't just
Yeah,
like willy nilly, like, I don't know, do it some days, don't do it some days.
of course.
Of course, like you want to, it's all about your intention, right? So if your intention is to do it consistently, then do that. But if you miss a day here and there, what's really important is that we do hold that self compassion and don't overwhelm ourselves with negative emotions or thoughts
Yeah,
about
I
it.
should have done that. Yeah,
Because if you think about it, that's kind of like going against the purpose of it in the first place. Like you were talking
right.
earlier about the self compassion aspect and how sometimes you struggle with that, something you're working on. So if you look at it from an objective perspective, lacking self compassion for not having self compassion is just lack of self compassion inception, right?
Yeah,
You're holding attachment to an attachment, so to speak, or an attachment to an aversion,
yeah,
meaning like, oh,
yeah. You were
I
saying
have to
about
do
that last
this.
week.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, I talked about this last time. So again, if you find yourself struggling with, let's say, with self compassion, don't get down on yourself about not having self compassion because that's, again, it's an inception. You're doing it
Yeah,
twice now. And that's where the practice really comes into place. We just observe, we just
hmm,
observe that moment and that experience and don't correlate it, don't label it, don't, put it in any box. It just is. It just is. That's it. And when you do that, it really will melt away in that moment. And then when you let it melt, if you don't build it back up, it'll pass. And this is constantly happening all the time. In every moment and of every second, we're doing these things, we're creating stories and whatnot. And that's why it's important to try to be as present as possible, especially in those situations when we're getting down on ourselves or when we're struggling with something, because that's where you're
yeah,
able to really dissolve the problem at the core and the root. And that was, like the biggest thing for me in my journey was it was just always, it always attacks the root. If you find out where, excuse me, if you pay attention, you'll find out that the root is there and you're able to uproot the issue from the root, if that makes sense. I'm saying the word root a lot, but you get my point.
I do. I do. You got to the root of it.
Yeah, it took me a minute though. But yeah, well, so how is, you had mentioned earlier like good days and bad days. That was one of my questions for you. Was so
Yeah.
what does that look like? What does a good day look like? What does a bad day look like?
Well, a good day is, oddly enough, it happens more often during work or during, I don't know. It's kind of weird because the truly best days that I've had, like recently, like nothing exciting or crazy happened, but I did feel like I was moving from just one task to another. Like there was nothing in my way. And, that was sort of what I was texting you about the other day is like, the energy I was putting out seemed to just be really well reflected back. I was very eager. I was very, open hearted and, willing to put in effort. And even at times where I have like a challenge or something, ahead of me that kind of gets to be tricky, like there was very few moments where I'm like, oh man, I really don't like what I'm doing or I don't like how this feels. There were, it was just a very, like on days like that, the good days I would say are really just effortless, if that makes sense. Like just very, I'm almost not thinking. Like I am thinking, but it's like that clarity you have when you're, through a really good meditation.
Yeah,
Just,
it's like
there's
that
nothing.
that pure that flow. I would say maybe.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. And then, in the bad days, like it's, I think more close to what you're describing as that like inception of an attachment, like I'm realizing like I'm starting to have a bad day and I'm trying to, really hard to focus again on my breath or, like read some scripture or something and like sort of find opportunities to, recalibrate and catch myself. And sometimes it works, but other times, I'm just totally lost. Like, and it almost feels the opposite where I'm like trying everything. And, I don't want to say that, that it's like unexcusable just because, I've been moving and stuff. So I'm literally like putting in effort and
Yeah,
like, using my body and stuff like that and just becoming more and more spent. But, like, I don't know, maybe it's like the external circumstances that are what's making more of a difference than I'd say my practice and resilience through it. But I do feel though, I mean, I guess I'm not saying much when I say this, but it's like I drift farther away from what my practice has taught me when it gets difficult. And I don't know if that's what kind of causes it to feel like worse of a day than it maybe really was, or if it's just one of those things where, you know, like I said, like I'm looking at like the end of the day thinking, oh, well, I could have done it that way, or maybe this is, you know, I missed a meditation. Maybe that's what started this whole thing. And, you know, I know it's irrelevant and illogical and not really the point of why I'm doing this, but I would say that a bad day compared to a good day is just like just trudging through mud, or just you know, feeling very sticky, feeling like just slower than everything around you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, there's a lot to say to that. I think, well, first off, going back to your good day, um, I love the way you described it because it is exactly that. You know, even for myself, like the best days of my life that I enjoy the most are like the more sublime, blissful days that aren't necessarily full of joy and jumping
Yeah.
around and excitement, but are really just peaceful, right? And I think that that's what a lot of people really I think that's what we really want in life, honestly.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I mean, yeah, we want money, and yeah, we want all those things or whatever that society tells us we need, but really what we want is peace and security. And it seems that that is actually much more attainable than most people think, especially in the West, where we live in America. You know, we're pretty safe and whatnot. So I think that you know, one of the things I've been practicing a lot recently is, you know, to get to that place is to kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but kind of recognize that flow that's already there. So we're
Yeah.
talking about that flow, right? Like, you know, whether it's just, you know, going to work and, you know, interacting with people and kind of finding that rhythm of the day and allowing it to be there. That's a big, and this is something, again, a little bit personal for me, but I often find I start, you know, I'll create a story. I'll start telling myself, well, I have to do this and this. And I haven't done that, you know, when it comes to my goals or my intentions in my life. And so then I get down on myself because of that, and then my day turns to, you know, poop, so to speak, because it's just, it's now not flow, you know. Now I'm literally, and if you look at it though from objective, I'm the one who's disrupting my flow in this moment. I'm the one who's stopping it, you know. Like, it's my mind and my overactive mind that's stopping the flow. So it's important to, with the mindfulness that we're practicing, to be aware of that before it gets too out of control. You know, a good way to look at it is the snowball rolling down the hill. The more you let it go, the worse it gets, and the bigger it gets, and the harder it is to stop it. And so that's where mindfulness is huge. It's so big. You just got to catch it. Remind yourself it's impermanent. Remind yourself you're telling yourself a story. Check your attachment. Check your aversion. Where are you in this process? Okay, there. Oh, I'm struggling with this, and then just allowing it to be. You know, and yeah.
You know, it's funny because like it makes me think of, you know, during like a deep meditation practice, and this has happened to me a lot like recently, where, you know, like I'm getting to a point, like whether if I'm like coming from activity and going into a meditation like I do like in the middle of the day, you know, this is when it happens probably more often, but I slowly feel myself get into that flow state. And like, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, I get like kind of excited. Like I sort of start grasping at that feeling like, oh, it's coming. Oh, I'm doing so good. And then like, you know, as you're thinking about it, it goes away. And, you know, I would feel that like that also happens in my day to day is like, you know, at any point, like if I'm not making sure that I know, like, and on that really good day I had, you know, I didn't really have this problem, but when things are going well, like having that reminder of like, it's going well now, and like, don't be attached, don't expect it to go this way, because, you know, to be not attached, like, kind of lends you a little bit of flexibility so that when things don't go your way and you know, you get some curveballs thrown at you, you know, you're not like, oh, I was doing so good and what
Yeah.
happened, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I mean, that's
something I'm
attachments and
feeling happening right
expectations, all
now.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that last part?
Oh no, I'm just saying, I'm just seeing it happen like in real time, and I think that is also part of those bad days I was describing. Is like I'm really getting stuck and, you know, struggling really because I'm noticing I'm struggling, and like I won't let that go. But
Yeah.
the moment I realize I'm doing good, like I have to handle it almost like in the opposite way of how I handle like a bad day, like. You know, I don't know. Sometimes it's just conflicting, like whether or not I want to like have that disciplined and gentle determination that I practice, but not going so far as like
pushing it back
taking
against
them
it.
out of. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or like trying to mold it a certain way, or make that like good day go a certain way. Like there's good days, and then there's like days that you look forward to, and things like that. And I think oftentimes they're different. Like there's a difference between like having things and people in your life and gifts that bring you joy, but then there's like just boring day-to-day life that that's kind of what I'm more referring as like objectively it may not be the most exciting day I've had, but I consider it really good because I have nothing to complain about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important too. Like just going back to your pushing back aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely like keep an eye on that because now you're kind of creating multiple layers, right? Like we talked about of attachments, and it's really important. And I think personally between me and you, or not even personally, I guess objectively or whatever subjectively, between me and you, I think that is something that you struggle with after like the last few of our sessions that we've had, is you're aware, you see the issue, which is great. A lot of people don't have that mindfulness of thought even to be aware of an attachment or aversion, but then you layer something on top of it. You layer a new attachment or aversion just because you recognize. So it's like you're kind of doing yourself a service and a disservice in that moment. And so what I think you should practice too is simply observing it. And it sounds like almost counterintuitive or kind of null and void, or just nothing's going to happen. But when you do, you'll see how the world that you're creating starts to like literally dissolve and vanish before your eyes. And it takes practice because your mind is going to want to run and run, especially if you're triggered. Like if you're triggering your fight or flight, if you're like triggered because of whatever, you're triggering a trigger pretty much, you're triggering because of a trigger rather. You're going to have your amygdala going off. You're going to have things happening that is going to prevent you from seeing things clearly. So it's important that you stop the snowball early, as much as early as possible, but still just practice and hold space for it. Just hold space for it, because I think that would really help you. I think it's that pushback I think you're struggling with. And if you want to really look at it from I was going to say this earlier, this is a more of a advanced philosophical topic or perspective. It all just is, man. There's nothing there really, right? Like you're creating that world, and you're creating that world because of your patterns. And that world is a fabrication within your mind, right? Because someone else could look at it completely different, I mean, it's all perspective, right? So in that truth, you want to sit in that present moment and sit in the truth of perspective and try to observe it almost objectively. That can also help as well. Like looking at it, if you were a friend, watching your other friend go through this, and see, oh man, it's really not that big of a deal. You're overthinking it. People always tell you, or people tell me a lot, oh, you're overthinking it, or something like that. Or they've told me that in the past. And when you hear that, it's like, all right, maybe that's like a flag. Like, all right, maybe I am overthinking it. Maybe there is something I'm overthinking. And so it's now we're doing that for ourselves. A few other things I wanted to touch on too. So the first thing, because I wrote down some things. First off, don't try, right? Like, don't try, just do. The words of Yoda, I think he said that, right? And what that means really is like the quickest way, I think I told you this a couple weeks ago, the quickest way to practice is to do nothing, right? To not react, to not respond, and simply observe. It's a very simple way that I think a monk was quoted saying that somewhere in Thailand, the quickest way is to do nothing. And so that's like a really profound statement. And it almost sounds like a paradox, but what you're literally doing is just watching it. So keep that in mind. Like when that thought comes in, when you see a negative experience happening, just watch it. And then the other two things I wanted to say is, as a layman, you and I have jobs. We have work. We have, work at home, chores, partners, food, all these things that we need to worry about and deal with. And that can really create burnout over time. And burnout is a very unique thing. I think more people should talk about it. I think a lot of people experience it. Be aware of burnout for you. When you start to meditate more and more, you've probably already experienced this. You really start to get so in tune with your body that now what to do. Like if you pay attention, you kind of can listen to your body and know what to do to help it. So for me, that might look like, hey, today's going to be a light work day. I'm going to do as little work as I have to, so I can spend the rest of the day in meditation or relaxing, if I want to, go get some comfort food, I'll allow myself that, as long as it's within reason and I'm, still hitting my other goals when it comes to my physical health. Things like that. It's really important to hold a little bit of like sincerity for yourself, and allow for good, good pleasurable things. It's very important not to be attached to those pleasurable things, of course, when it comes to Buddhist practice. Don't let that overcome you. Don't have attachment to it. But you're allowed to treat yourself, especially as a layman, because I think we have so many different things that we have to focus on. We want to allow our bodies to bounce back is my point here, and if that means, hey, I'm gonna go get, for me, I love Korean barbecue. It's a little expensive and sometimes high in sugar, but like, I'm gonna go get some Korean barbecue. It's my comfort food, excuse me. So remember burnout. Remember burnout. You might be getting burnt out. If I was you, I probably would be getting burnt out. If I was working and moving, you're probably experiencing that.
It's like almost exactly to a T. It was making me think of like, we were moving our furniture on Sunday, and I, for some reason, I was just like in some weird thought loop about we had like a new bed that we were trying to get ordered, but there's like 3 beds that came with this house that we're trying to figure out what to do with. And for some reason, like, I had to have my spouse explain it to me 3 times on which bed we were moving and which one we weren't. And in my mind, like, again, like, it was like, I was like getting sticky. I was getting stuck on a problem that, ultimately was like, it would have been solved, and the worst case is I just grabbed the wrong bed and would have to figure it out again. But yeah, like that being compounded with everything I've been doing, and getting down on myself for not fitting in daily meditations and stuff. But like I do need to allow myself that grace and compassion. But like I said, like, it's times like these where like I feel like I'm really going to, if I don't do something about it now, both in regards to my health, mental, physical, and spiritual, like if I don't do something about it, if I don't learn a proper technique and practice on how to overcome that, like it's going to lead me down a dark path that I just don't want to think about. But, I'm grateful that it's gone as well as it has. And, I didn't have to will it into existence. I did work on it. I did do some things. I didn't necessarily just do nothing in this particular circumstance. But, I kind of knew from the get-go, like, it was going to happen. We were going to do this move regardless, and it was going to go the way it was supposed to go all this time, And there are ways and things like that we can maybe do it more efficiently and maybe do it, with like less stress and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's just a stressful time.
No, it is. I mean, moving is so much work, and like, I mean, last time I moved, just a random funny little story. I was living in a studio apartment above a house, like directly above a house, and I was moving from the studio apartment to the house. And so it was like, I don't know, like 20 steps below me. It was like there's these steps outside, and I was like, cool, I won't get any boxes. I told my fiance. She went to work. I was like, I'm not going to get any boxes. Why would I do that? I can just move this stuff down. I'll just make trips. It took me so long. I ended up throwing everything in the middle of the living room, like just piles and piles of random things, clothes, knickknacks, furniture, whatever. And I just remember getting extremely burnt out, and it was one of the hardest things I think I've put myself through in a very long time. And so, I know, dude, moving is absolutely ridiculous, and I think that it's actually admirable that you're even attempting to, like, the fact that you're even, like, saying, hey, Brad, like, I'm going to keep trying, as opposed to you could, be like, Bradley, I'm canceling this, or I don't want to do this right now, like, call me back in a few weeks once I moved. I think it's admirable. I think you should show yourself a little bit of compassion and, to sound cheesy, pat yourself on the back, because it's a big thing. So that's where, and just recognizing that, like, the more so back to that part about burnout, the more you meditate, the more in tune with your body you get, the more you're going to recognize, okay, I don't want to overwhelm myself with too much. And the truth be told, the meditation practice is not really what's going to be overwhelming you. I mean, really, when you think about it, exactly like you said earlier, you could do 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day in between stops or whatever of your job that you're doing. That's great. That's really not that much out of your day. What's really going to cost you energetically is how down on yourself you get if you miss that 5 minutes, or how down on yourself you get if you miss a day. That's what's really important right now in this practice. And it's funny because it's funny because it's being caused by like this thought that you're having that's you getting down on yourself is somewhat being caused by the fact that you missed a meditation, whereas the meditation is going to help you be aware. So, of course, the meditation is important, but it's like a backwards loop, so to speak. It's a feedback loop, I guess, is what I'm saying. So keep in mind that, it's good. It's okay if you miss it. Allow yourself that grace, absolutely. And just try to be better the next day. Like you're not competing against anybody but yourself in this. And that was something else I wrote down while we were talking is, work up to it. Think about when you go to the gym, like you can't just like go in and lift 1,000 pounds or whatever, in a leg press.
Yeah.
You got to work up to
Yeah.
it. And so if that looks like, all right, I can only meditate 3, and that's why we're kind of working up to it in the beginning of our sessions. But with the move, I'm sure that's kind of knocked you off the pace, which is okay. You know what I mean? Like, no problem. Don't push yourself too hard. I guess what I'm saying is like that cadence is going to be decided by you. And you do that by testing. You do that by trying things out. What would really be helpful too, I recommend, is writing in a journal at the end of the night. All you have to do is write down like what went well, what didn't go well, and what you think you could do better to make the things that didn't go well. Dude, it takes like 5-10 minutes. It's huge. My therapist taught me that. It was really powerful. And again, as a layman, like we really do have to organize our lives in ways that are conducive to our practice and vice versa. So back to that. Just I want to make sure I hit everything I wanted to hit. Work up to it. You're gonna be the one to decide that cadence yourself. So allow yourself that space, and allow yourself that grace, and then also forgive, man. Like forgive yourself in those situations. If there's okay, let's put it this way. If this is the last what I wanted to say. If it came down to two options, all right. The first option being you push yourself as much as possible and meditate as consistently as possible, but in that process, if you miss, you get upset about it, and then that knocks you off your cadence for the rest of the week, versus you working as hard as you can, meditating as hard as you can, but being forgiving of yourself when you miss a day and quickly jumping back into the cadence. I would choose option 2 for you, for anybody. Because if you get too hard on yourself with option 1, it's going to be a domino effect. It's going to be a loop that's just going to keep happening. So your goal is to stop it at its source, and the best way to do that is also being forgiving. Like don't get too hard on yourself, and that mindfulness of thought's going to help, that observing's going to help, but it's also nice to have a little bit of compassion for oneself as well, and just allow that to be there as well. Does that make sense? Does that, like, those two options, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like how I say, like, don't miss 2 days in a row. Like, if you're out of a streak, like, just pick up where you left off, and yeah, I think that's right. I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, don't miss 2 days in a row, sure. But if you happen to, I'd rather you be like, okay, I missed 2 days in a row. That's something I did not want to do. I'm recognizing that, but I'm looking forward now. That's right. It. I'm looking forward.
I mean, like, in general, like that. It's just another rule I've heard around specifically about, like, working out or, like, trying a new habit. That if you want to do something every day, what you should really work on is, like, exactly as you say. Like,
I see. Okay.
Be ready to just get back into it, and God forbid it's 2-3 days a week or whatever. Like, just have that courage and that mentality. And luckily, I felt this way about meditation specifically. Sometimes I get down on myself for a lot of other things in my life, but meditation specifically, I will just say, has been getting easier to forgive missing, especially now. And like I do know I have less of a problem missing a meditation versus, maybe some of the other things that I used to be worried about, whether it's like, I've let my health kind of go by the wayside. So I've gained a lot of weight in the last few years, or I've stopped going to the gym. Those are the things that, I guess, like, specifically on that day, I told you, like, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now, like getting bad news from my doctor and stuff like that, compounding, and basically being reminded of what I haven't been doing, instead of being, like, honest and truthful of, like, there's no time like the president, and there's no time like, now to just pick up where you left off, and it doesn't have to be this big whole heroic comeback and, just start eating 1,200 calories and hit the gym 3 times a day. Like, I can take those baby steps, and if I just think similarly to how I think of meditation, like, this is not supposed to be like you're the best meditator in the world, and you're never going to be like the best meditators if you're not doing it
Yeah.
this certain way at this certain time, but rather like, no, this is more personal to me. There's a actual like something I'm getting out of it that no one else is getting out of it. And I'd be very silly to hold myself to expectations based on, other people's accomplishments versus like what's going to work for me in my scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with pretty much everything you said. I think that I think that there is a little bit of toxicity in this world, especially with social media and stuff, when it comes to doing things and getting things done and setting somewhat goals for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because it really comes down to like, what do you want to do, right? Let's put it this way: what's the goal? Okay, if the goal is to get as big as possible, let's just say like from a bodybuilder's perspective, and you're working out every single day and you are literally killing yourself over it and you're unhappy and you're losing your mind and you're not getting sleep, is that part of your goal? I mean, for some people it may be. They might be like, yeah, whatever it takes. But I think there's a balance that we all should be looking towards, a practice, right? The middle way in Buddhist practice. Find the middle way there. And the cool thing is you can adjust as you go. And that's what I was going to say too. It's back to like it's a momentum thing, back to working up to it. When you build up to it, not only does it become so much easier, right? So like you can go lift that 1,000 pounds much more easily and not feel as burnt out over it. But it's also a better way for long-term consistency, because if you're trying to build a solid meditation practice and you're struggling with being consistent, getting down on oneself is not going to help, and pushing oneself too hard is not going to help. So you have to find your middle way for you, like you said, and dude, and paying attention to that, recognizing that, writing in the journal is really, really helpful, because you're attacking it with a bit more of intention and a bit more organization. So I think that would be huge for you too. And everybody's on their own journey, everybody's on their own path. Some people deal with forgiveness better than others. Some people deal with self-compassion better than others. And so if you're finding yourself struggling with those things, I do think that you should recognize, take a moment and give yourself the space and really just, again, man, just observe it. Just recognize it. Try not to react to it. Try not to put a story on it. I was supposed to do this and I didn't do it, and now I'm overthinking it, and now I'm thinking it about overthinking it, and I'm wasting all this time, because you're just keep building that house of cards that's looming over you. But all you need to do is simply observe, do nothing, be there, and the whole house of cards will come tumbling, and then you can regroup. And again, it's not that we're saying, okay, well, we're just not going to do anything and we're not going to work towards anything. Of course we are. But in that moment, we need to take a step back, let the cards fall. Then we can kind of direct our attention and attack it more. I don't like to use, sorry, I shouldn't use the word attack, and be with this practice more productively. It's like I don't know, there's another example, like there was a story I heard, there was a Buddhist monk who went out into the forest and stood up as tall as he could and sat there for days and days of meditation, and was, struggling, but was really, really just forcing himself to sit up tall and to just not move. And then there was another monk that was kind of slouching and falling asleep and waking up, but still was trying, but wasn't as aggressive as the other monk. And the Buddha he said the second monk was doing it more correctly. His practice was more correct, because he was practicing the middle way, is what my interpretation of it. But also the fact that he was allowing for the space to mess up, if that makes sense. It's like if you try to perfect something that is A, unperfectible, and B, perfecting it isn't going to achieve the results anyway. There is no perfection, it's simply being dynamic. And so I think that you're finding your cadence, which is great, and I'm happy to hear that. And I think that it's just a continuing of that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's something I'm trying. I'm sorry, I'm like rearranging stuff in my room.
No, you're good, man.
Yeah. I'm just, I think I feel it, and it's one of those things that I told you about. Like, I know it. I know that that's what I'm supposed to be doing, but without that consistent practice, I guess, like, it's not going to come to me as naturally and right away. But that's why I practice. That's why I am engaging in this, and philosophy of just, getting back into things and not, trying to like just stumble through and be that monk that sits up tall and is struggling. That's going to be helpful, I think, for my journey.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I mean, and I could even ask you this question yourself because I'm obviously relaying things that I think will work for you. But what do you think would work for you? I mean, do you have any thoughts or ideas on things that you could do in those moments, or things that you have done that have worked for you well already?
Um, yes, I think, it's as easy as in some situations, like, I try to, as soon as I can, or as soon as I realize I'm getting kind of thrown out of whack, like, what was something that's been helping, because of your meditations is like when I am thinking about like inside my nostrils and just starting there and then just keeping that for like 10 breaths. And if I still have time, then I'll move to the back of my throat and my chest and my neck. And, like kind of working on almost like a little mini body scan in that moment, does seem to help. But as far as like long term, like what the contingency game plan is, I think it's going to be easier for me now. Well, I don't want to make predictions or anything, but I think it's going to be easier for me now that I am not moving anymore, that now I've found my space, and I'm literally currently like arranging my room so that I have room to, reset my altar and stuff and have like a little corner that's like my meditation center, so to speak. But, like really, I think taking that practice and like applying it to multiple facets of my life is like, I think, like you said, like give myself space, I think is really what I'm actually after. What my real goal is, like if I have space, I feel like things like compassion and forgiveness and, self-love will be easier to develop, instead of me being like, okay, how do I get this self-love thing? How do I go after this anatta thing? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah.
I kind of do, I think what I'm hearing from you, I guess, is like, I think I just need to take like a step back or two, when I'm getting, caught up in these things, instead of,
Pushing into
like
it
you said,
more.
like, yeah, instead of like trying to attack the problem, like you said, like what I'm really trying to do is understand and be aware of that problem. And I guess that it's the double-edged sword of just, I've gained this awareness, I've gained this mindfulness of my thought and my mental state, and now it bugs the crap out of me. it's because I'm aware and because I feel that suffering almost like a lot more than I ever had in my like blissful ignorance before.
Well, it's funny,
Like
that's a good point, but I would argue that you were always feeling the suffering. It's only now that you're recognizing it and you know how to stop it. That I think that's the
yeah.
difference.
There's less things in my way to block it, and like whether it
Yeah,
was alcohol or partying or
absolutely, absolutely.
doing things that, yeah, that suffering was always there. But what I'm saying is like it's a lot more clear to me, and I'm a lot more like I can actually physically feel it at times now, and that's kind of a weird thing that I've never had before. Like I generally just sometimes felt good, bad, and neutral, and I would think I know what was wrong with me, but I'd sort of just brush this off and find something to distract myself with. But like now, again, like when I've been undergoing this practice, when something feels wrong with me, not only do I know what it is that's wrong, but now I have that awareness and that forethought of like, like where does the attachment come from? Where what does this, mean for you? Are you practicing anatta? And like, I don't want to say I'm overwhelming, the Buddhism part is overwhelming me, but like I said, like now that I've had that practice and like truly understanding what my body's trying to tell me, it almost feels worse. Like it's the same feeling, but now I just have less things in my way to like truly understand that. So the next step, I guess, for me is just getting really good at making moves, getting ahead of things like that, and not, running away, so to speak, but just first be present with those feelings and aware of, their presence in my life, and then have that conscious desire, or maybe that's not the right word, but that intention to, let those things change on their own, and like not have to wade through the water in order to change it, but just
Yes.
let it
Satu,
happen.
Satu, Satu.
Yeah.
That was great. That was so beautiful, man. That like got me a little emotional, honestly, what you just said, because that right there is such a big part of the journey for so many people, and for me, and for everybody who goes through this. Like, you're doing the work right now. That's why it feels like this, because you are facing your, demons, so to speak. You are looking yourself in the eyes and going within, and it is the noble act, my friend. It is the noble truths of suffering. That's why they call it that, because when you step into this path, it is noble. It is a noble. The eightfold path is the fourth noble truth. So it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. And if we want to look at it from a bit of a cosmological Buddhist perspective, you are literally going through and using up and eradicating your karma that is holding you here in samsara, right? If we want to look at it from a secular perspective, then we would say that we're simply ending our own suffering in this present moment and allowing ourselves to be here. But you will find that you will feel lighter, as well. This is, again, more of a cosmological perspective that I can just kind of give you a little lesson on. A lot of, the Buddhist teachings talk about karma, right? And karma is actually what holds us in this human form. It all starts from our ignorance. And they say that in Buddhist cosmology, or mythology, or however you want to phrase it, religion, whatever, philosophy, they say that the humans came to be from ignorance. Originally, we were these light beings. We were these beings of light, or beings just floating around without bodies, not like ghosts necessarily, but we were in this realm. And over time, our ignorance started gathering. I kind of like to look at it. I don't know if you know how like stars are formed, how it's like a whole bunch of stardust, and then over time they start gathering more and more, and they become dense and more dense, kind of like that. You're becoming more and more dense, and eventually we started developing these human bodies that we live in, or other types of bodies from other realms, and it pulls us down, and it keeps us heavy. And so a lot of what you could interpret it as, I haven't read this, but I'm kind of bringing in some New Age practices as well, and philosophy, that as you start to ascend, quote unquote, or become further down the path towards enlightenment, you get lighter. And I think physically you could look at it like that to be true. Sure. I mean, we don't have science to prove that, but let's just say, even just spiritually, physically, as far as how you feel day to day, you probably will feel lighter, because you're letting go and you're eradicating these past issues. You're looking at them in the face, you're dealing with them, and you're moving on. Like you said, you're letting them change. And what you're finding is, truthfully, a lot of the problems we make up ourselves, and a lot of the problems are unthinkable, in the sense that we can't think our way out of them. There's no way to think our way out of them. We really just need to let them be. Yes, there are problems, sure, like when you lose your job, you need to think, okay, how do I get a new job? That's different. But most of the problems we have in our day-to-day life, we can't think our way out of. We're creating them, and then we're trying to think our way out of them. And if we just stop them at the source, we would be so much lighter. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's kind of what I was receiving.
It's exactly how I describe, like, again, my good days is like, I did feel lighter. I did feel like there is literally less emotional and intellectual baggage on my head, that I wasn't, like, I was thinking, I was conscious, I was acting, I was doing, things, but it was effortless. It was like, as if, like, kind of like wading through a pool. Like, it's like, you can do all these beautiful things, and your body's not really, being put under stress, and your mind not being put under stress. Like, you just feel like, that this is like things fitting into place. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
I don't want to get attached to that specific, realm. But yeah, I think that is what I'm ultimately after in my life is, if that's what that means, if that's what ending suffering means, and what happens when you do it, I don't know if I would say that I'm able to become enlightened in this lifetime, but I've already accepted that, like, that's not really my point. That's not really my intention for undertaking this practice. It's just to end suffering, both for myself, those around me, and things like that. I don't really care much if it happens in this lifetime, but it is. It is actually, I do feel like, happening right now. That ever since I've started this journey is like, now that I'm aware of it, I can sort of be conscious on what I'm allowed to suffer with. You know what I mean? Like I can, in a way, almost choose my suffering first and foremost. There's a lot of, I think, suffering that I feel like I can't choose just based on how my attachments work. But on the other hand, though, like the first step, like that first layer is just being aware of those problems and being aware of how we create even more problems on top of it or make those problems worse.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't realize how weightless I would feel after I like actually like kind of addressed that in my life, and you know how much I feel like I've changed as a person since doing that, and since, you know, kind of shaving off that top layer. And you know, I can get deeper and deeper as the years go by, but you know, I do feel like this is making a difference.
Oh man, that's beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. That was like going to be one of my other questions, was how everything's been going. But and we can talk more about that in a second. But first off, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm really, really happy to hear that. Like that is kind of what I experienced as well. And so when we started this, that was, I mean, wasn't expecting anything, but to hear you put those words together, like I'm thinking to myself, like, yes, yes, like I actually bowed my head to what you were saying. You know, I find like I do that often when I'm like in deep meditation. If I get like a realization or an understanding of my suffering, or in my courses that I've done, like same thing. Like, you know, I'll be having some major epiphanies, and when you have that clarity, that's just something I like to do, is kind of put my hands together and bow my head, because it's like this, it's like a gratitude for the realization, and it's not necessarily a gratitude like towards anybody or anything like that. It's, I think if anything, it's just a gratitude to the practice that I'm doing for myself, and also just a gratitude that I am now seeing things more clearly. And that's what this is all about, right? That's what all this types of meditation and the teachings of the Buddha are all about. It's about eradicating ignorance and gaining wisdom to what you're saying right there, the wisdom of our own suffering, the wisdom of our own ignorance. So first off, yeah, thank you. Really, really appreciate that. Yeah, man, no problem. I mean, I'm just happy that this is working out very well. So that's beautiful. I wrote on the piece of paper, like to the left, I wrote the word avoidance, and then I drew a line, and then to the right, a peace, the word peace, and then in between on that line, I drew like mountains, you know, ups and downs. And I think that's where I think that's the path that we all are going through when we do this, you know. And and you were saying, you know, yeah, when I would avoid things, I would just drink. And I think that there's so many people in the world that just avoid. And the problem with that is you can only avoid for so long. And at a certain time, things are going to come up, right? You're going to get triggered. You're going to have bad reactions, you know, whether that being, you know, a myriad of things, drinking too much and being abusive towards a partner, even just having, you know, traumas appear, or PTSD, whatever it is, 1,000 different things depending on what we've all gone through in our own lives. But that path to peace is there. It's just, again, it's a noble path. And it's something that does require discipline, does require balance and practice, but is noble, because you are doing this not just for yourself, like you said, for others as well. And yeah, man, this is my goal in life. Honestly, I think in the last few years, I've kind of developed this intention, especially in the last 6 months. It's like to help people awaken to the path of happiness within themselves, right? That's like what I have in my bio currently, and probably will have that for a while, because that is my intention. I want people to awaken to the path of happiness within themselves, meaning you don't necessarily need anything external. Yes, you need the teachings, sure, to kind of follow the path, but really you're the one doing it. You're the one walking it, and it's within you. You know, it's just a matter of taking the step, I guess, within oneself. So, oh man, yeah, anyway, just very happy to hear that you're doing so well with that.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, you are doing a good job at this. And I think what I really, you know, personally appreciate is like I don't know, like I would like to consider you a teacher, but I think you're kind of doing a little bit more than that, where it's like I don't feel like this is top down kind of information, right? that you're sharing with me, but rather you are, you know, you're relating to my experiences, and you're kind of reacting as I go. And you know, you keep reminding me, and it's nice to have the reminder that we are laymen. We are people that, you know, with householder lives, I think is like what the Buddha called it. Like, we are householders. We have commitments and things like that can maybe prevent us from shaving our heads and living in the mountains and stuff, and like really like boiling down deep and trying to attain enlightenment faster. But honestly, like, it's also, to me at least, I feel like it's more important to have people like that, to have participants in day-to-day society in America or in the West or wherever, where this perspective itself it's quite rare. It's not, readily talked about, and those that talk about it have a hard time explaining it to people that aren't in this practice, that don't have this language. And so when I was like really early on in this, I was thinking like, man, I really want to talk to someone about this that's also going through this and stuff. And in my mind, I was thinking, I need to find a teacher. I need to find like real good practicers, and find get really delving into it. And then getting a little overwhelmed at that idea, but knowing someone like you, like with the internet and stuff, like it kind of takes that stress away, or it takes that pressure away. Because to me, when I see your videos and stuff like that, like I'm like, oh, well, that's just what this person's doing, is like he's trying to explain to someone who does not know, or doesn't have like a frame of reference for what Buddhism is and like what it means to others. Like, I don't know, like I remember one of your lives, you were saying like you were worried about, you mentioned something about you were worried about being like the white person trying to explain it to others. But, I respected what you were saying, because it was like, well, who better to explain to other white Western, people than like a white Westerner, right? Like a lot of it, I don't want to say like you're better at it than, those that have been practicing this religion for generations, but you have the language and you have like that intermediary ability to kind of explain it in a multitude of ways, like just like in this call, like you give it in a cosmological Buddhist way, you give it in like a foundational Buddhist way, you give it in a secular way. Like all of that makes sense, and I resonate with all of those because I'm on that path and I understand it. It's just really refreshing to have someone like on the ground level with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate the kind words on this, because this is obviously like the first time I'm really attacking this with somebody one on one. And you're totally right. I mean, that was kind of my whole point of everything with this, was like, if I could explain these teachings to people in the West in a way that would relate to them, I think I could do a lot of good work. And but still, of course, pay as much respect as possible to the teachings of the East. But what's funny is, the world we live in is very unique, and I think one would find that actually people in the East, even though I'm a white person explaining this, would actually be very happy to hear that, mainly because because I do pay a lot of respects to them, to the teachings in general, to that community, that culture, as much as possible. But two, like, because of what you said, because I have the ability to relay it over as well. And I don't think that they would hold anything against me just because I'm white. It's like, because because I really care. I mean, this is something that I've put a lot of my time into, a lot of energy, and I really, really focus on making sure that I know the truth before I start talking about it. Like, I will look up things multiple times in different ways. And then it comes down to like resonance, I think because I'm really on this path, I've been able to pick out things that that doesn't really seem like the best explanation. All right, this definitely is more on point with what I think is meant to be. And then I'll cross-reference it, and I'll ask. I'm really lucky because of TikTok. I have some followers that are from Burma, from Myanmar, from Bhutan, different places, Sri Lanka, and I can reference them, and I can say, hey, curious, is this what it is meant to be? And in the end, it also comes down to interpretation. A lot of the philosophy is so much interpretation, but it's pretty structured and rigid, and it's pretty well laid out. And in the end, I think sometimes we can overcomplicate the philosophy and the practice and the teachings. And when you really just look at it, basically, you can get the basic understanding of it, and you don't need to make it more than it is. But to add on to that, just quickly, I can learn from you as well. You might read something and have an interpretation of it, and might phrase it in a way that I might not phrase it in, and it might hit me in a different way. And so that's the other part of my practice and my teaching of Buddhism, whatever you want to call it, philosophy practice, is that I have my interpretation as a Westerner from America, and how can I put it into words for somebody like you who's also a Westerner from America, and hopefully have it relate.
I was about to say too, like, I don't know if this is something you struggle with, but I struggle when I talk about, my beliefs and what I learn, like, with maybe non-practitioners, is I have a hard time sometimes separating, like the true Dharma, like what the Buddha's actual words and things like that, and then my own spin on, not my own spin, I should say, but, like, my interpretation too is, like, I don't want to give people, like, the idea that I know enough about this to teach someone or to, like, get them into it, but rather that, like I was telling you earlier, there's a lot of things in the Buddhist literature and philosophy that I've just sort of already inherently believed
Yeah.
and just never really had, like, an explanation for or a way to, like, put it into words, but that, through my kind of maybe haphazard exploration in the religions, like, once I came across Buddhism and how they explained it, I'm like, that's it. Like, that's when it clicked, when I'm like, that's exactly what I'm dealing with. And I, like, I even spent some time trying to, like, argue against it and, like, find alternative explanations. But
I love that.
I'm always brought to, like, square one of, like, wait, no, like, that, like, it was right all along. And on top of that, like, the Buddhist mentality of, like, it's anti-dogmatic. Like, it's like, don't just listen to people talking about it. Go try it. Go find your attachments in life. Go sit under a tree and, like, feel your breath and, like, actually put these into practice. Don't just, say, well, that's what they said, and so that's what I'm doing now. Like, you need to find that proof in your life. You need to, like, be a scientist and, like, run your experiments. And I have, and they've confirmed, maybe I don't want to say it's confirmation bias, but, like, I do feel just reinvigorated that I'm like, I feel like I found a calling in some regards, and I don't want to call it that because it does give the air of attachment in of itself, but, like, I feel like I'm going the right direction. Like, I feel like, it's the direction I'm heading that is correct, not really what I'm doing in the moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a whole nother conversation, right? Because there are multiple paths, I think that if somebody were to say, well, Buddhism's the only path and the correct path and that's it, I think that it's personally, I believe it's from what I've learned, it's the most well explained path. But that doesn't necessarily mean it is the only path, right? There's different forms of Buddhism. There's Hinduism. There's different types of, you could even argue what Christ was teaching was very similar to what the Buddha taught. Some believe that Christ actually was taught by Buddhist monks and became enlightened, and it's just now a matter of, like, what do we resonate with, I guess, as beings in these moments. And I'm right there with you. Same thing. When I first discovered it, I was like, this is it. Like, this is it for sure. Like, and it's weird because I'm not saying it's the only it. And I think that, if people were watching this recording right now or listening, I want to make that clear. I'm not saying it's the only it. You have to be Buddhist. I think that there are a lot of Christ followers that do get it. They pay attention to the real teachings of Christ, and they understand that compassion and that love, and they do it in a different way. But I will say that with the respect that comes out of Asia, the respect for one another, there's something about the Eastern practices that are, very congruent year after year, person after person. It's very much a matter of respect when one monk teaches another down the line. So anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But to your point too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying that there's wisdom to be derived everywhere, both from Christ.
Yeah, exactly. But what I love is, and like to your point about, like, the practice though. So, like, let's just push everything to the side. Like, when it comes down to oneself, we have to find those answers within oneself, or check those questions or check those answers and verify them for oneself. Right? Because, again, we could talk about it all day, but I love what you said. All that was so great. If you go under a tree and follow the breath, and if you look at and check your attachments, like, you will see the truth of suffering. You will see that it is there, and you will continue to follow the path. You will see how to eradicate it and what to do. The truth of cessation of suffering, the truth of the path of the cessation of suffering, and so on. So, yeah, man, I'm right there with you, and I'm just happy that. I'm happy that it's gone this way for you so far. And you're right. Like, the more you notice it, dude, the more you're going to see it. And there will be moments of, back to the mountains, there will be moments that are tough. But as you do it more and more, it just gets so much. It's like that momentum. It's easier and easier, and your life just becomes so much more peaceful and happy. And I'm not saying that you're never going to experience another problem, but that
Sure.
in that moment, that is the test, right? And if you really want to look at it from, I guess, a cosmological standpoint, when we look at the karma or the kamma that we develop, it's really important that we don't react, because when we're building more kamma, and
Yeah.
you'll see that happen. I mean, there's been times where I've literally got, I mean, everybody's had this experience, I'm sure, in their lives. They get mad at somebody or they yell at somebody, their partner, their spouse, and then they stub their toe. And then the partner's like, well, that's karma for you. And it's a joke, but it actually is, I think, in a lot of ways is true. It's you created the karma, and then in that moment it was expelled. You created it and it was expelled. And that is we could talk about that next time, about how that really works in the inner workings of the teachings of Buddhism. But we all are made up of karma, and that's what's holding
Right.
us here in samsara. That's what's keeping us in the cycle of death and rebirth and suffering, from the cosmological standpoint. Again, from the secular standpoint, we could look at it just simply as suffering in general. But yeah, anyway, I digress. Okay.
Thank you, Bradley.
Yeah, no problem, man. I'm glad it worked out, and I'm glad you're doing well, and this has been really enlightening for me as well, and I hope for you, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, may you be well. Thank you so much.
No problem.